hoping I will be able to get my hands on soon. So lots of definitions of crowdsourcing are out there, lots of types of crowdsourcing projects. This is one from a recent publication in MIT Press, online distributed problem solving and production model that leverages the collective intelligence of online communities to serve specific organizational goals. That's kind of dry, but it's a way of, what I've seen is harnessing the spare processing power of millions of people, essentially, which is a slightly weirder way of looking at it. But using, instead of trying to have a team of experts go through all this data or transcribe all these things, using the crowd, however that is defined, to do that for you in some way, usually through a series of small tasks that can be repeated over and over again. Sometimes for pay, sometimes not for pay, which is something we'll talk about a little later. There are tons and tons of crowdsourcing things out there in a variety of different avenues. So if you've ever had to type in a CAPTCHA or a reCAPTCHA, you're doing a crowdsourcing project. If you are looking for online genealogical records, I think I spelled genealogy wrong. That's something that you're participating in that as well, that you can index and transcribe things like that. The Adopt a Hydrant campaign, which if you read the Mother Jones piece for last week's workshop, they talked about that's the project where people can go online and say they're going to shovel out this hydrant in a snowstorm. Wikipedia is a famous example. That these are user-generated collaborative edits to this encyclopedia, although not without its own biases and problems. Lay's potato chips crowdsourced their new flavors. So a lot of companies are turning to the crowd for new ideas. There's an XKCD comic that talks about, we crowdsource this and we crowdsource this, then we crowdsource this, and just to show that they aren't actually doing anything. OpenStreetMap was used during the Philippines typhoon to map areas so first responders could do their jobs better, and did it better than a lot of the international relief agencies, just volunteers mapping these sections out. Duolingo is an app where you are translating things while you're learning a language, and you're translating different web pages from the web. Blue Servo is it's a to say the least controversial website that I think is down the last time I checked, where there are people monitoring the border, the Texas-Mexico border, looking for people crossing. Then they can notify Border Patrol and things like that. So this is used for a wide variety of aims. Political, business, cultural heritage, things like that. So we're going to talk about two of these in this workshop. The first one is going to be the citizen science aspect, and the second one is cultural heritage. Now, I want you to take a look at some crowdsourcing projects. Who here has participated in a crowdsourcing project at some point? Okay. So go to this link. There's a bunch of different crowdsourcing projects listed here. Everything good on the chat, Amy? Now, once you're there, just start looking around, looking through them, and guide and have these questions guide your analysis, your viewing of these projects. What's the core goal of the project? How well is it communicated by the site? You are doing X to solve Y, or you are helping to do this. Contribute to X study or whatever. What tasks does this project ask its participants to do? Are you tagging images? Are you transcribing documents? Are you finding shapes within other shapes? Things like that. How easily can you find your way from the front page to the starting task? What outputs are produced from the crowdsourcing? Are they making, is this going to go into a larger data set that will help X problem, or things that contribute to papers or things like that? How are people's contributions validated? Do you get a little star for every one? Do you get, can you see yourself ranked on a leaderboard if you've done a lot? when you see this website, who are their audiences? And what led you to believe this? Is there a clear call to action on this? Why is this important? How are participants rewarded? We'll talk a little bit about that later. The necessity of rewards, especially with volunteer-based projects where there's not the monetary reward. And then finally, what motivations for starting and or continuing to participate are supported by the site's design. So take 10 minutes or so, look through these projects, go through a few of them, and we'll come back and we'll talk about some of your observations. The link to the presentation one more time. Oh, okay. Oh, the link. You just want to look on with someone else?
Yeah.
You can borrow
Come on
mine.
over.
We're all friends here.
Copy the bit.
Yep.
To do one of these and then spend the rest of the workshop doing it.
That's a good project.
Building inspector and NYPL. I love all of the lab stuff. You've never had a chance to get it. I forget the director. And what at ALA. The menu project. It's just so much. It's just not fun.
I know.
I quit. I'm gonna go work for NYPL labs and just play.
There's
Play all day.
they don't do that though.
They don't?
No.
We do that.
I'll play.
We met with one of the developers from there.
Oh, did you? Oh, really? Yeah, because they're part of a like curatorial division, aren't they, or something? Yeah. It's just the one guy is like really super fast.
I worked with those paper copies for my dissertation.
The menus?
No, the buildings.
Oh, really?
I was just on the transcription project. I'm just going through.
Yeah. So keen on data entry.
Yeah.
I'm also fun with like kind of crowdsourcing.
project envy, Justin.
Very good.
How you feel?
No, that's right. It's a time, yeah. So can I could play with it. And the voice. Humanities has the diaries. Others can do it besides. Okay, yeah. Tool number 15.
Okay, I think playtime is over with the crowdsourcing projects. But the penguins need to be counted and marked, and the animals need to be tagged. So let's talk about which projects you looked at and what you thought of them with this kind of rubric here. There are microphones above you, so people online, you should be able to hear the conversation. If not, my trusty sidekick Amy, who is monitoring the chat, will tell people to talk louder. So what projects do you look at, and what struck you about them?
Okay, I went to one of the Zooniverse projects. It was old weather. I thought, wow, this is really easy to get started out and do something. I think they really made it clear what they're looking for.
Yeah.
They really try and get even the casual looker engaged in it right away. They say, here's why it's important. But the thing that I found impressive was how easy it was to jump right in.
Yeah, ease of use. Cool. Maybe else find that, Laura?
Scroll down the list, your list of Minneapolis newspaper index, but I couldn't see anything to do.
I think it's all done.
Okay, because I don't know if there was crowdsourcing involved at some point, but nothing, I could find nothing on that page about any way of participating.
Yeah. I think it's done, but there was a way that, there were two boxes. The first was the index PDF, and the second was a box where you typed what it was and you submitted it. I think it's all done.
Well, and I also looked at Trove for Australia, and that one was kind of interesting because, but you have to, they don't really make it very easy to find the things necessarily work. You have to just kind of find them by serendipity.
Yeah.
So it's a newspaper index database, and they allowing people to correct the text that's been, not. I think it's pretty easy to do that once you found something.
Yeah.
You can't just hone right in on the things that.
Yeah, good. Because it's part of a larger project. That this is just one component of it. And I think with Trove is one of the big success stories in this kind of vein of cultural heritage. I don't know how many millions of pages of text they've had transcribed and corrected. But that's always pointed to as one of the big successes. And I don't think they imagined that it would be so successful. So that's part of the reason I think it's not as built in like a Zooniverse project where it's right away you can get started.
Well, what they need right now, there isn't really.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Sure. Laura said how it's not as easy with the Trove page to just get to a task like it is with Zooniverse. And this is part of it's because it's part of a larger project about Australian newspaper archives and databases. So their goal in designing it was not for ease of use per se. Once you get to a thing that needs transcription, it's easy, but you have to get there first. That's not as easy. Other comments?
I ran into one more thing on the Minneapolis newspaper index, and that is I clicked the more info link.
Yeah.
Okay, so down on the bottom of that page that comes up. Okay, here it is. There's guidelines for correcting Minnesota newspaper index text. Okay, I click that link and I get access denied. You are not authorized to access this page. Eek.
Jason Roy would not be happy that I'm broadcasting this to the world.
Oh, sorry.
So, edit. But that is an example of something we've already done here with this project. I think this was an older project, but just to show that it doesn't have to be on a large site, this really big platform. We can do this on a small, and we'll talk about a few different platforms later on that will allow you to do this on a smaller scale. What else? Other things we've learned.
I was working on building inspector and outlining from building. And I really liked up in the corner, you can view everything that you've done, and it
Why is that important?
It's more motivating. You can start, so I'm thinking about it from the education side of view, or side of things. And what's really motivating is coming up with questions, like having your own curiosity drive further participation, and having context really helps with that.
I think it also helps. So being able to see the entirety of Manhattan, see everything that you've done to that point, it was a really good way of showing context. But it also, for me, it also was a motivation. Like, look, I've done all this stuff. I want to do more. Like, I haven't done the Upper East Side yet. I have to do the Lower East Side now, or things like that. So it wants you to keep going. Else? Yeah.
So I was clicking through a couple of them, and I was on Old Weather, and that brought me to something you don't have listed, something called Cyclone Center, where they're having you analyze radar of tropical storms and categorize the type of storms there. And I'm not a scientist by training, but I got really engaged very quickly. And they had these. It was great because it was instantaneous. They had what they wanted you to classify, but then they had on the side of like, okay, here are what the 5 different categories we're asking you are, and there were photos, and so it was really clear. And there was also an optional tutorial, but it was right there, so it was really easy to jump in. And before I knew it, I was starting to classify things. I mean, you have an optional login, which I know is important if you want power users who say, hey, I've done 100, I've done 1,000 of these, that's important. But before I knew it, but it was so clearly explained, very colorful, and so it was just very engrossing from the get-go, which I think is important.
Absolutely. So Cyclone Center being again, with the ease of use, the ease of getting started, even for non-scientific people.
I just looked at identify the sea floor.
Yeah.
And I think my 8-year-old would totally be able to do it. I mean, with some guidance, but it would be a really interesting way to engage, young kids into science, and to actually say like, the tutorial said, no, that is a dead sea urchin. Do not identify that. Like who knew it? So.
Yeah, my dad is a 6th grade teacher, and he's done stuff with Snapshot Serengeti, which we'll look at a little bit more with the 6th grade class. My friend Mitch talks about how he spent a lot of nights with his 3-year-old matching ancient Greek letters for the Universe Ancient Lives project, because it gives you a Greek alphabet that you have to match with papyrus fragments and things like that. So the whole age range. What were you going to say, Scott?
Well, you just called it. I doing the snapshots and get is my last one that I did. Yeah, that one. It's for you. Forms get a little bit confusing.
Figure out the horn shapes and things like
Well,
that.
yeah, because some have horns. This is a curved horn, or is it a lyrasis horn, or I don't know what. I didn't even know what lyrasis horn was until just now, but I now know.
I find the text ones a little more problematic, because if there's an error in text, which is you're being asked to transcribe, you transcribe the error, or you sort of try what it should be. And that's where having guidelines like Eric didn't discover would have been very helpful. Is that common for that to be an issue for people doing?
What do you mean an error, I guess?
Well, we looked at one of the cards and it said contempt charges instead of contempt charges.
Oh, okay.
What do you write?
Oh, I would transcribe it faithfully to what's on the card.
But I would like to have an option to do it both ways.
Or to have to say like, misspelling what it really should have been, so if someone was searching.
Because then when you go back to try and text mine that thing, that's not going to come up.
No.
Right.
So yeah, at first I think you want to transcribe it as faithfully as possible, and then when you're getting into the data mining and the analysis stage, that's when you'll go through and find the mistakes and things like that.
But even Google, like NVgram or Google NVgram,
Mm-hmm.
so you see with Ngram, sorry, you can see they didn't correct a lot of those things.
Oh yeah, there hasn't been time, or I think with a lot of those, it's a question of the technology available to do that in an automated way.
Well, I'm saying Google itself hasn't done a great job of OCR.
Yep.
Kind of correction.
So yeah, so we saw a bunch of different ways that projects both in the citizen science realm and the cultural heritage realm can be done. So again, we are tagging images, whether they are animals or you're just describing what happens in the scene. I'm a big fan of the Flickr projects that are there. No one talked about those, where my favorite is the waste binding project, which is from University of Pennsylvania. waste binding in medieval studies is when they used one manuscript to bind another manuscript. And so they will put all of the covers online on Flickr or something, and then people will identify, oh, that manuscript is from this thing, or that's a piece of this, this manuscript is from this author and this scribe and this era and things like that. Because parchment and vellum were not as plentiful, and so they reused whatever they could. But again, the way of a kind of unconventional way of using this as well. And so we saw there's the Civil War project up there, a lot of these other Flickr-based projects. So again, having this, you don't need to have this large-scale project or this large-scale kind of interface for these kinds of things. Any other comments on what you looked at? Yeah,
I was looking at Penguin Watch just briefly. That's just so cool, but it just struck me what a great teaching tool that is, because it forces you to really identify adults and chicks, and so I can really see how it would be used in a classroom.
Yeah, I haven't found any chicks or eggs yet.
Oh, have you?
I haven't found them yet. You found chicks? Okay, good. It's hard to see, yeah, especially the ones where there's just lots of them in for the photos. So cool. Well, I'm now going to turn it over to Hanukkah Mo, who's a postdoc in CBS, and she's going to talk about her work with citizen science in the classroom, and specifically the Snapshot Serengeti project.
All right, so I come from education background here and biology background. So I'm coming to crowdsourcing from a very different angle and sort of discovered it in my quest to do something else, right? And I did a little bit of reading on citizen science projects where scientists engage the public in collecting data for their science projects, and tried to figure out what was going on educationally in these projects. And I found that the primary goal of these projects was to collect the high quality big data that couldn't be collected by a single lab, and that it was reliable enough that you could use it for publications. And this was sort of the primary reason why these projects were being created. But there was a secondary objective that was present in, I think, and it's part of the whole proposal writing process, I think, the outreach piece of your work, is that these projects would help improve public scientific literacy. So let's look first at that first objective of creating high quality big data. So what are the education goals that you have for your participants if you want them to produce high quality data for you in whatever format that data comes? There's sort of two education goals as I see it. Content knowledge, you want them to know what they're looking at. And procedural knowledge. What am I supposed to do? So when you design your citizen science project, you want to be thinking about those things. So I'm going to use Snapshot Serengeti as an example because that's the project that I've been working with. As far as content knowledge, you want your users to be able to look at these two images and tell that that's a Grant's gazelle and that's a Thompson's gazelle, right? For procedural knowledge, you want them to have knowledge of what they're supposed to do and that they do it correctly. So when looking at a Snapshot Serengeti picture, you want them to identify where the animal is, to the best of their ability, identify what that animal is, how many there are, what they're doing, whether there's young present, and then finalize their identification. This is the procedural knowledge you want them to be able to do. And in order to get them to do this, you need to give them simple tasks. If they have if they have multiple things that are presented to them at once, it can seem too overwhelming and they'll just give up and leave. So you want to start them out with simple tasks, which builds confidence and skill. And as they show mastery in those tasks, add more tasks that are more complicated. And this is actually a concept in game design. It's the whole leveling up idea. that as users demonstrate their ability, new tasks and responsibilities are unlocked. And that's a motivating force for them to continue participation. So how are we doing? How are the citizen science projects out there achieving these goals of the content and procedural knowledge, as well as the high quality data? From what I've read, it seems like we're doing a pretty good job. The studies that have looked at before and after scientific knowledge of participants have shown increases in content knowledge. Those that are participating in bird migration studies can distinguish between different species of North American birds. And those that are participating in invasive plant studies can identify invasive plants and tell you why they're a threat to native ecosystems. It also seems that we're doing a good job in getting high quality data that can be used for publication. In the study by Freitag and Becker that was published last year, they found that 97% of the people that published data from a citizen science project were happy with their data. They thought it was reliable. And Snapshot Serengeti has found that their participants are identifying animals with 97% accuracy compared to expert classification. So we're getting good data. Great. But what about the scientific literacy part of it? This isn't looked at quite as often. And it depends on what you mean by scientific literacy. If you're talking about identifying animals, yeah, we're increasing scientific literacy. But Neil deGrasse Tyson would tell us that to be scientifically literate is to empower yourself to know when someone else is full of bullshit. Which would imply that you know something about the nature of science and the process of science, which is actually a fairly complicated dynamic process that includes, yes, the testing idea, the whole hypothesis, experiment, conclusion, but there's this dynamic back and forth between exploration and feedback and application of what you find. And understanding this would really be more indicative of understanding the nature of science, having scientific literacy. So how are we doing on this? From what I read, we're not doing as good of a job in having learning gains in this area. Most of the papers that I've read have found no learning gains in understanding the nature of science and basic scientific concepts like the difference between correlation and causation. There are a few studies that have found that there are some gains, but these are normally studies where there is more intense participation, where the participants are going out into their yards and doing something rather than sitting at a computer, and they have a longer term involvement with the project. So from one of these papers, pulling a quote, deep learning benefits from practice, from discovering and working through mistakes, and from allowing ample time for reflection. And you'll probably think that from your experience just now looking at these crowdsourcing projects, this doesn't really describe that experience. You're not really going to be working through a whole lot of mistakes and going back and reflecting on what you've done. So it's been suggested that there might be a conflict of interest between these two objectives, that what makes a crowdsourcing project able to produce high quality data, that pipelining and that system of checks and balances and sort of a lack of flexibility in what direction a user takes, is not actually beneficial for learning scientific literacy, right? That complex process. So what's missing? Well, from that quote, time for reflection and the flexibility to make mistakes. And then I also found that there's a lot of context that's missing. Users don't know what is happening before and after their contribution. They don't really know who's doing the research or why or what they've already found out, and they don't know what's happening with the data that they've collected. There's not a whole lot of iteration. When you look at a picture, you generally can't come back to that picture unless you've decided you're going to at that time. And collaboration. You're generally sitting at a computer by yourself. So there's this open question of, are we actually addressing the second goal of scientific literacy with citizen science projects? And is it even possible to do that if we want to get high quality data? And this is where my story kind of comes in. I was hired by the University of Minnesota on a Howard Hughes Medical Institute grant to do this, incorporate authentic research experience into a non-biology major's laboratory course. So these are students who have chosen not to pursue biology. They don't necessarily have a biology background. They might not want to be there. And they might only be taking one science course. This might be it. So they have one semester to have an authentic research experience. And I actually thought that citizen science would be a perfect opportunity to do this because it's user-friendly and engaging, and there are low technological barriers. As you guys experience, you can jump right in and start participating without a whole lot of training, right? But if we want them to learn something about the nature of science, which is one of the huge goals that most biology instructors have, we need to add in some of those things that we're missing. So what I did is I developed a 6-week curriculum to go with Snapshot Serengeti. I had the students use it to make observations and individual pictures and look and develop questions based on those observations. And then I had them expand that to looking at sets of pictures over space and time, looking for patterns, asking questions about those patterns, all while collecting high quality data. And then we gave them some context to go with this. We gave them a broader picture of the project, that these cameras are located somewhere in a pattern, and some of those camera locations are closer to water, closer to roads, and then a bigger picture of how big this camera grid is within the Serengeti Park. You're not going to see a wildebeest migration happen in that one spot, right? We also gave them a little bit of background on the system, had them build food webs or interaction webs among the major players on the Serengeti, so they knew something about the animals they were looking at. We also had them read some current research papers and had them focus on finding out what question was being asked, what kind of data was being collected, and what was found. And this is sort of build the seeds of hypothesis generation for them. And then we gave them access to data. We gave them the entire output, cleaned output from the Snapshot Serengeti project. And they could address whatever question they wanted with this. So we're going to give you access to that data. It is located in that Google Drive folder. It's actually a subset of the data. I'm lied. It's large predators. So you've got the cats there. And do you want to jump in here and give them some instruction?
So this will serve two purposes. The one is going to be to give you a crash course in OpenRefine, otherwise known as Google Refine before it became open. Who got it installed on their machine? Cool. So you will download that data set. I'll start a new project. And if you don't have it or don't have the program, just look on with someone else or just follow along.
How did I do that?
Something would flash and then it would.
So for those of you who do have it working, you're going to go to get data from, so you're going to open up the program. It's going to run in your browser. This is just your local host. So no data is going to anywhere else.
I'm going to make it big full screen.
Branded as Google.
It's still branded as Google Refine, but when you go to Google Refine, it just goes to either OpenRefine's page or GitHub, and they don't maintain it anymore. Google doesn't maintain it anymore. So, but I don't think they want to change all of the interface for it. So you're going to go to Create Project and then get data from this computer and browse to wherever you downloaded that file. And so this is the Serengeti Large Predators file. Click Open. You'll see that CSV file here. Click Next. It's going to upload the data. Upload. So big file. Not as big as the first one that we were looking at. I think that was like 45 megs or something like that. It's a really big, that's a really big spreadsheet. Upload. Array for live demos. Is it opening up for you guys?
I
Oh,
don't
there we
know
go.
how to even get to this screen. I downloaded all the files for the program, but I
Okay.
don't know what to.
It's on a PC, so I'm not
I
sure.
have downloaded, I just don't know how to get to
Yeah.
where you are.
That's my exact
Yeah.
same.
Yes,
Okay. Well, then just follow with me. Just follow along for now or look on with someone. The interface is going to be the same since it runs in a browser. But just if you're just looking on with someone else, it'll be the same. So it's going to give you parsing options. So it's automatically going to find the row and column headers. And so sometimes you'll need to change this. In this case, we won't. We know this is a CSV file. Click create project. And we will shortly have this up and ready to go. There we go. So what's really, really nice about this program, if you were here last week and you saw Alicia go through R, it's really impressive to see someone do that. It also takes a lot of skill and a lot of programming knowledge to do that. And also if you run programs like SAS and other statistical programs, I've done things with this and able to parse out and facet data that people who use SAS said that would have taken me 3 to 4 hours to figure out how to do that. And it's all in here. So if we go along the top, we have the subject of the universe. So this is the person who actually picked the animal, clicked on and said, this is a wildebeest, this is a deek, this is this, this is this. This is the site. So this is the site of the camera trap. This is the date on which they entered this. This is the month, just specifically the month, the year, the exact time, the species. If there are individuals, they're standing, resting, moving, eating, interacting, there are babies there. And then some things that are not in the Snapshot Serengeti interface. So the lat and longitude, altitude of it, distance to trail, distance to river, distance to confluence. What does that mean?
Rivers come together,
Thank
so it's a biologically
Important area.
important area.
Yeah. If they're shade, they're trees, they're grass, things like that. So we can start generating some questions with this. Is this just one site or is there multiple sites?
There should be multiple sites.
Okay.
There's a site that captured a large predator.
Okay. So let's say we're just going to look at one site. We'll click on this arrow here. We'll go to facet and text facet. And it's going to come up with all of the different unique texts that are in that column. And since this responds to the sites, we know that this is going to be Q09 will be all of the things, large predators at that particular site. So now we've scaled down our data one level. What's another thing we should look at? Give me another variable to check out. Okay, so we go to species, we go to facet, go to text facet. We have 68 records in this. Let's see how many cheetahs there are. This is interesting. That's taking this line. There we go. So we found there are 39 cheetahs. Yes.
Could be one cheetah.
Could be one cheetah. Have they done any correspondence with like radio tagged animals or?
So they're analyzing specifically cheetah photos and identifying individuals from their markings to try and figure out individuals' movements.
Yep.
The lions are radio tagged.
Okay.
Photographs come in triples?
Yes.
One
So
photograph,
you
is
can
that
see what
three or
they're
one?
doing. So that's from a set.
It's a set,
Yeah.
county sets. It's
There's
not
one
county individual.
identification per set.
So we've got 39 cheetahs here. 39 photos of cheetahs. Cheetahs, not Cheetos. I knew I was gonna say that. In a
How
matter
many
of time.
different days does that fall on the same day?
A lot of in July, 7/14, 7/15.
When the photo was taken or when the photo?
Photo was taken.
So the question is, why were there more in July? What could have been the reason in that particular site? We can look at what are their different distance. You know, if we looked at a different site, so we can do that by so let's go to, if we take out that first site and we are just looking at cheetahs, it's going to give us cheetahs across all of the sites. And so we can see, well, there's more in this area in July. Maybe there are other ones at a different site in August. I think this might be a way of tracking migration patterns. So just this way of quickly faceting out data can lead you to ask some questions and start to develop some hypotheses just from there. And this is something that a lot of workshops and guides and things like that, the crowdsourcing mainly focus on getting people motivated to do your work or do your work for you in some ways. But it's less focused on what you do with the data after you get it. And so how can you construct things from this? I think especially within the kind of cultural heritage projects, they just say, I got all this stuff I need to transcribe, I need it tagged. Then I can do stuff with it. But with some of these, you can actually start generating hypotheses, generating things from the get-go. So now we have all of these cheetahs from all these different sites. We have 1,259 cheetahs. What's another question we can ask?
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Babies interacting.
Babies
That's
interacting.
fun.
I have seen a lion with babies interacting, playing at dusk. It's adorable.
That would help on engagement.
Yeah.
Motivation.
It's like written kitten.
We've got papers on
Well, I had
motivation.
selected out a set of photos from a single day for them to look at across the whole grid, like turn the classroom into a grid. And I found a day that there were baby lions playing, so they could look at that.
Looks like we don't have a whole lot of cheetah baby pictures. It's either 0 or 1. Let's try the text facet. Try the numeric since there are numbers in there, but we can try text. It'll just come up with 0 or 1, and then it'll just be the ones that have a baby in there. So not a lot of baby cheetah pictures.
Anything in here?
Zooniverse has a site called Zoo Tools that allows you to filter photos by species, by site. So you can look at pictures that were all taken at one site or pictures of cheetahs, and you can go through that and try and find. But getting to the single picture doesn't have that
Do
capability.
the ID, do the photos have IDs?
They do have unique IDs.
Is there another data set that shows the ID matched to the photo?
Well,
Could you
not
use-
matching to the, so users do not have that ability.
If they did,
It would
then
be,
you could use Google, use OpenRefine to marry something that's matched IDs with photo links to a set like this, and then you probably could navigate.
yeah, it would be great. It would be great.
Yes.
Because that's something students have asked for. We want to be able to see this picture, because we
Yeah.
want to know what
Right.
interacting
Right.
means.
Yeah. So there's a pretty widespread for, these are all just cheetah babies, and we have April, July, May, November, and September. So a pretty wide spread of when they showed up in these camera traps. So not a whole lot of evidence there for oh, we can see them all this time. They're like, oh, this was to make a jump like, oh, these are, you know, mating cycles and things like that. You don't have any evidence of it here. But maybe if we have other sets, we look at other patterns or things like that.
It looked like there are lots of different camera sites, so they
Yep.
might not have breeding grounds where they sort of hang out when they have babies.
Yeah.
4 of those sets are all within an hour. Probably the same.
The same ones. Yeah. Mhm.
Exactly what you did to the.
Yeah.
Record it, and it does the same thing again.
If you, I know I did a study that was 2 years old, and I couldn't remember the steps that I followed
Yeah.
data here early. I mean, that would just be really useful to
Oh,
be able
yeah.
to go back and try to figure out
Your future.
what it
self will
was that
thank
you did. Yeah.
So I think it doesn't do it automatically. Infinite undo history, every change has been shown here, except that I think this maybe is only changes to it. And so if we just put it, say for instance, we're working on a project where we're cleaning up a bunch of different data from different libraries and you know, Walter Library, Wilson Library, and there's no controlled vocabulary for it. Sometimes it's WILS, sometimes it's Wilson, sometimes it's OMWL. And so if I went through and changed all those to Wilson, I could then go back for it.
Does it keep your.
Yeah. So what Alicia brought up was this undo redo function, and that you can have a history of aspects of your work for reproducibility. Another thing she brought up is once you get to this point of I have 1,259 matching rows with this, just with cheetahs, I can then export just this into a TSV, a CSV, or other things. And then it can work from there as well. So as it says, power tool for cleaning up messy data, I fully agree. So that's a nice crash course, and also as a way to start thinking about what you would do with your data afterwards. And then we'll go back to the.
Found one picture with cheetah babies interacting.
Aw.
I mean, I'm not actually looking at the picture. One exists from July.
I wouldn't really call this messy data. I mean, this is actually very clean data.
Oh, it is really clean data. But when you have, if you have a lot of it, it's really good to pass it through that. But then also when it is messy, like the example I had with the different library things, then you can make it really easy to clean it up. So, no, that's not messy. I would love to have data like that.
All right, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I did with the non-majors. I gave them data visualization tools that were very intuitive and had a low learning curve, a very shallow learning curve on them. And it's actually, I used the program JUMP, the statistical software package from SAS. And it has 2 tools in it that I taught them how to use in like an 8-minute tutorial video. And the first tool is the data filter, which does a lot of the functions that Google Refine, that you just saw done in Google Refine. So they can filter their data to contain only the data that's relevant to the question that they're asking. And then there's this graph builder, where they can just drag and drop variables onto axes. They can overlay different variables, they can color code different variables, and they can select from a number of different graph types. So they can visualize, really play with the data, visualize it in a number of different ways to try and answer questions. And we started out giving them a guided inquiry before we set them loose on their own question. So we'd ask them a question like, assuming predators are captured on camera during hunting hours, which animal do you think experiences more hunting competition with lions, leopards or cheetahs, and why? So this introduces them to the idea that you have to make assumptions sometimes when you're looking at data. But then also it gives them a sense of there are multiple ways to do this. They don't need a cookbook instruction manual to do it. So we gave them the data set and the tool and set them loose to try and answer this question. And some of them took a temporal approach. They used density plots. So time of day is on the y-axis, and they saw that cheetahs and lions were spotted mostly at noon, and leopards were spotted mostly during the night. So based on this, they came to the conclusion that cheetahs were probably in more intense competition with lions. Some of them wanted to look at individuals rather than density, and the students that made this said, well, there's so few leopards, and there are a whole lot of cheetahs. So regardless of what time of day they're out, cheetahs probably have a greater impact on lions as far as competition goes. Some of them brought in some other data. They looked at where cats were seen eating, and they found that lions were mostly caught eating from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. And according to that, maybe then they have greater competition with leopards, because leopards are active at night. And then another group of students took a spatial approach. They weren't even thinking about temporal. They were thinking about territory. So they mapped out where lions, leopards, and cheetahs were seen. And they saw a lot more overlap between cheetah and lion sightings than leopard sightings. So after we've given them this guided inquiry, we set them free for 2 weeks and let them come up with their own questions, investigate them, go down dark alleys, and realize that the data can't actually answer their question, come back and come up with another question, and go through that whole process that scientists actually go through in finding their research questions. And then we gave them some reflective assignments to think about what they had done over the 6 weeks. I had them give oral presentations, reporting what they'd done, what they found, and gave them surveys asking them what they had learned about the process of science. For reasons I'm going to tell you in a second, I'm going to change those reflective assignments to group blog posts where they report what they did and what they found, and personal essays asking them to write about what they learned about the process of science and how their interaction with Snapshot Serengeti demonstrates that. Basically, from these presentations, we found that students come to overreaching conclusions and make very unimpressive graphs. So we're going to be working on that. So, you know, not 100% success.
This won't be one of the articles that you have in your class.
Pretty great. And we're going to introduce an element of peer review to try and avoid overreaching conclusions.
Which will help them with scientific literacy.
Yes, exactly. But in the surveys, I was shocked at what I found. The responses that I got when I asked them about what they learned about science from a finance student. I learned that failing to find what you're looking for is still a result and happens often in science. That a negative result is a result, it's not a failure. It's not a failed experiment, it's not a failed study. Pretty profound.
Yeah.
A journalism student said, I learned it's not as linear a process as I thought it was. Hypotheses and conclusions change alongside the discovery of new data. It's a fluid process. That, it's exactly what we wanted them to get out of it. It was amazing. We didn't tell them to do anything but go. Architecture student. Being a design student, art has always been a stronger subject than science for me. With this lab, I realized the two are very similar. The process of discovery is the same, and even science takes creativity. Mind blown. Mind blown. So, I think based on those responses on that survey that we did get at some scientific literacy, some improvements in scientific literacy. So what I kind of want to pose to you is what could we incorporate into citizen science experiences that could, instead of have this conflict between the two goals, simultaneously reach both? How can we incorporate some of those elements that I incorporated in a curriculum within the citizen science experience? And is it possible? And should we do it? And I was talking about citizen science and scientific literacy, but you can extend this to any of those sort of deeper learning goals that you would want in any field. So engagement with cultural heritage or connecting history to current events. That's the question that's open that I'd like people to think about and hear people's thoughts on.
Seemed to me this would be one of the instances, I mean, because we do this also in biology classes with podcasts and students who create videos, supplemental content throughout the semester. I do this with zoology. Support that. it seemed to me this would be a great opportunity actually for a MOOC type of content built into the activity. This is an activity.
Yep.
So you have one intervention amongst other, but what you're talking about is really a curriculum, it seems to me. And so you need to incorporate some kind of option for curriculum for people who want to get the better sense of what this is. I don't know that you can build the curriculum into the activity. So it
perhaps-
seems to be whoever's the PI on these should offer some kind of maybe scaled down kind of good opportunity for kind of a
Yeah, to
MOOC-ish
develop
type of thing.
curriculum alongside.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a massive, yeah, something where they could get some context.
Access to the data and be for the data and see how individual observations fit into the bigger picture piece of this. I wonder if something where, you know, someone's gone through a few pictures as an idea, you can pose a question like, do you think common in grassy areas? And they could go through a few and they're like, wow, I keep seeing cheetahs next to a river, not in grassy areas, so obviously not. And then you're forming a conclusion based on a small amount of evidence, and then show them where those fit in the larger picture. Maybe some sort of population sample. Implicit science is not as nice as I think having the time to devote, for example, in MOOC focus curriculum, but I feel
Getting
like that
people
could give a
thinking about
flavor,
those
yeah.
questions. Yeah. Oh, so the idea is basically having people post questions on the citizen science platform and have people be able to respond with specific pictures or small data sets to address those questions. So, you know, do baby cheetahs appear in real grassy areas? And people can respond to that by posting whatever pictures they found or what they've seen. So there's a discussion, there's that collaboration piece of it.
Also have, like, if someone does an analysis on a photo and have the system say, we found several pictures from the same camera that have the same kind of interaction, where they have the opportunity to see all of them, and then for them to, is there something you can tell us about these, like, they're the same animals? I mean, or it's the, you know, or now there's a mom that had 3, you know, cubs, and now there's only 2 that, you know, I don't know, something that could, you know, say like, there are similar pictures. What kind of story can you tell us?
So proposing, perhaps proposing a course of, or a specific data collection. So if you post a question, you could say, can people please watch 4 pictures from this camera? I'm interested in X, Y, or Z.
But the system too could also say, alert, we've noticed something too, that could, so that there's not just people saying, posting the question, I've seen this, but the system saying, we've noticed a lot of pictures that are this kind of, you know, so it's a back and forth between the people and the actual system reporting that something is happening.
Snapshot Serengeti actually has a really cool feature that's a blog from the scientists. So there's one of the graduate students, well, she recently defended, Allie Swanson, has been keeping a blog and posts notes from the field or graphs that she has produced and patterns she has noticed or cool pictures that people have brought to her attention.
But there's 2 kinds of pattern going on. My work with this snapshot Serengeti was that you jump all over the place. You're never at the same site. And my assumption was the reason for that is they know the background on some of these photos. They know how to insert an interesting photo every so often. And that's the pattern they're using to engage people so they'll keep going, because if by every 20th one is going to be great, so I just keep going and find things. So that pattern is very disruptive of the idea of I want to look at one site for a whole day and get bored out of my mind because it's the same.
Yep.
So there's competition here in terms of the way the project is meant to work between science and engagement.
And this is where I wonder if the whole leveling up concept might be useful. That when you first engage with a project, you have this random, well, semi-random pattern that you're experiencing that keeps you engaged. And then once you're engaged and you have a question, that you can somehow level up to be able to look at one set of pictures from one place.
You're an analyzer now.
Yeah.
Where you...
Or like I've been thinking about it as like earning badges. You have demonstrated can identify, you can distinguish between these two animals really well. So then you're maybe allowed then to check other people's work that have identified a picture as this or that. And then there could be a question asking level or something like that. I really like the idea of leveling up. It fits in with the whole educational scaffolding concept.
I think that the challenge is determining, you don't want to demotivate somebody by throwing a lot of education at them if they don't really want to.
Well,
If they
yeah,
just want to do the activity.
you could stay at that
And
first
so
level.
having the option to actually learn more about the context or just do the activity, and you almost,
don't
because
want-
people will realize you're trying, if you build it in too much, people will realize.
You don't want people leveling up so they can look at baby cheetahs, when what you really need is counts of wildebeest,
Right.
which are.
I had a lot of gazelles.
Lots of gazelles too, but the zebras.
Thompson to be.
I get a lot of cameras that have been fallen over and grass blowing in the wind.
How many times is a picture analyzed? Just once, or is it done
They
multiple?
are
Like
looked
how
at
many?
by 25
Okay.
individuals, and if there's consensus, which is a certain percentage, it is retired, and if not, it goes to some experts.
I was, Justin, the earlier statistic on how these compared to expert, was that the aggregated rate of accuracy, or was that the individual rate of accuracy?
The aggregate.
Okay, so there's real value in doing that kind of. And were the scientists, were the experts aggregated as well?
I believe they were. They had a panel.
Yeah.
supposedly.
I think it's upward of like 97%.
It was a really impressive statistic, that's why I was wondering,
Yeah.
was that the individuals that were, or was that aggregated in both cases?
And if you could identify individuals that are consistently making correct identifications, you could potentially weight their identifications. Have them matter more. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. So there's a question that came in online about the connection between citizen science projects and cultural heritage projects, and everything we just talked about can transfer over to these cultural heritage projects as well. You've got all of these documents transcribed. Now I have all this text in front of me. What words show up most frequently? What words don't show up? Who were the authors? If they're the collection of letters, who were they writing to? Where were they coming from? You start generating questions, start generating hypotheses for this in the same way. Now that you have all of this stuff, now you have all these images. Okay, now you can start seeing, out of its entire collection of images, I now have, I know that I have the most pictures of baby cheetahs, or I have the most pictures by, Vivian Meyer or whoever. So you can make these same kinds of questions, the same kinds of hypothesis building with the cultural heritage projects as well. Nope, this is not my presentation. That's why it's not working. Any questions before we go on to, in sort of reverse order, designing a crowdsourcing project? People at home are doing fine? Okay. So there are two elements to designing a crowdsourcing project. And the reason I'm talking about these first, and we'll talk about the platform second, because especially when you're working with volunteers, this is where you need to spend your time thinking through, and again, we'll bring up this idea of scaffolding a project. Whether this be, what kind of tasks you're doing, how you're framing it, how you're contextualizing it, what greater piece are people contributing to. This is where you need to spend your time thinking through for it. So, and some of these will be familiar from the analysis thing we did earlier, but what's your call to action? Why is this important? You have all of these materials. Why is it important? Is it important just for you? Is it important, or is it important on the scale of old weather, where these seemingly unrelated things, old ship records of weather from the 19th century, are contributing to studies of climate change. How can you kind of narrativize your work? And relatedly, what will make people want to participate in your project? What's the, hey, this is cool. What's that thing where you're going to go tell 15 people after this session today, go do this because you're going to find it's awesome? What is that thing? Is it something in the material? Is it something in your interface? You know, one of my favorite ones that it's now done because they finished it was in Finland. We were just talking about Finland last night, that they have all the cool tech things, but there's this thing called Digital Coot. And it was, they were transcribing old Finnish newspapers and documents, and it was a game. And there was a little guy that went across the bridge, and you kept going until you got a word wrong, and you fell off the bridge. And so, you know, I don't know Finnish, but you know, you can keep doing that. That's the thing. It's a little game. You know, it's that thing that will keep people coming back and will want to tell other people about it. And again, what larger things will they feel connected to? I am helping to document, preserve, extend this piece of cultural heritage, or I'm participating in real research and real scientific research by doing this in a way that, you know, is closer, I think, as Annika showed, to the actual research process. It is not this other thing that happens in a lab where they have everything figured out and if they're just running tests over and over again and then they come to an answer and it's done. It's much more like how science actually works. And again, as she pointed out, you know, principles of casual game design. You know, simple control. I gotta click these penguins. That's all I gotta do. And rewards. I've clicked enough penguins. You did an awesome job. Then you're logging in. Then you're doing a ton. Then you get on the leaderboards and things like that. Badges and leveling up and things like that. So it's that the way you bring people in, and the way you reward them. But then also, again, scaffolding that experience of designing this project. So a clear sense of goals, what you want to accomplish with this project, and tightly defined tasks. We talked about earlier that it is really easy for you to get started with some of the Zooniverse projects. You can go from 0 to clicking penguins in 20 seconds. Another Zooniverse project that I actually had a hard time getting started with was Operation War Diary, because there's a ton of stuff on there. Lots of different things to start transcribing. And that was, in a way, that was very un-Zooniverse-like, because you had so many different pieces on there. And the interface wasn't as easy as something like what's on the menu, which the NYPL Labs did. They're like, oh, lobster bisque is 25 cents on this menu from 1854. And so then, to go back to that question of generating hypotheses, then you could look at it. Say you have all of the times that lobster bisque is mentioned on these menus and all the prices of them. You've now got a data set to go all the way through the history of New York restaurants and lobster bisque prices, adjusting for inflation. Yeah.
Just a question. Have you seen in any of these projects it just occurred to me that we all want to feel like, as a citizen, to contribute meaningfully to a project. Have you seen in some of these crowdsourcing projects an appeal that says these are the top 2 things we need help on, or 2? Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, sometimes there are, I would think of them not quite as stretch goals, but here are, we need this thing done, but this is what we're really interested in right now. Here's a theme, or maybe they'll have 10 of them, because this is another way to get people in to this. That will say, okay, I'm really interested in, the cheetahs. I'm really interested in the leopards. So you can have, maybe they will just have a set that's just of these. Probably not. Steven's shaking his head.
You gotta catch your wildebeest.
I know. I'm stuck on cheetahs and cheetahs. Cheetos and cheetahs are the reward. Now, if they had Cheetos in there. So yeah, that goes into that way of scaffolding and making these, giving people multiple points in, and giving multiple audiences into this. So yeah, definitely. I think there's something like the Smithsonian where they have all these transcription projects, but here's the bee project. We know this is really important because of counting collapse disorder and things like that. And so yeah.
Sorry, just another thought. When you're talking about a system of rewards, has anybody thought about credentialing for a citizen in some ways, so that part of the reward is that you're also referenced in some way for your contribution.
The famous case with Galaxy, case, it's a bad word. Famous example with Galaxy Zoo is that people found unknown types of galaxies.
Yeah.
A citizen astronomer, and has published about that since then. So yeah, there's not an official mechanism with something like Zooniverse, but again, when it's in this kind of research community, there will be a way to recognize people who are kind of not just going above and beyond, but are contributing even more so to the research than just doing the minor tasks. Yeah.
Got a galaxy named after.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wonder though, I really liked your connections, that you drew to me. Like matching people at next level or who are like experts.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial part in any of these things. Any other thoughts or questions? Anything online? Cool. So I'm going to quickly go over 4 platforms that are out there for you to use now, and then we're going to go into group exercise of starting to think through what a crowdsourcing project you could do. First, we've talked about a lot already. This is Zooniverse. The parent organization of Zooniverse is the Citizen Science Alliance. We've already talked about it's volunteer-driven. You've seen that they have many, many projects. There are new ones coming out all the time. In terms of backend, the projects as of now are built by Zooniverse. So you go through a project proposal form, which I'm becoming increasingly familiar with, as I'll talk about in a second, and they will build it for you because they have special teams of developers that build sites like Penguin Watch.
Yeah.
Okay, I was like Penguin Picker. No, that doesn't sound good. It was like a video game.
Don't use
So
that.
yeah.
Crosshairs going.
Yeah. So you go through this application process, and they will build it for you on their own platform. What is coming down the pike is that they are developing new tools that will allow you to better incorporate it on a much smaller scale and on your own. This is a couple years down the road, but this tool called Panoptes, which we're casually referring to as the DIY Zoo, and you can structure your data according to a certain template, put it into this box, and it's going to become a Zooniverse project that people can work with. Again, they're still developing. This is down the road, but we are working on a project here at the U of M with Lucy Fortson, who is the project manager of Zooniverse, formerly at the Adler and Planetarium in Chicago, which is one of the founders of the Zooniverse project, for this thing called Humanities. And these are text-based humanities crowdsourcing projects. An RFP will probably go out, request for proposals will probably go out next week, with things due in a month or so. I probably talked to some of you about like, hey, you guys got stuff you need crowdsourced? Come talk to me. But that's going to be the way to start having these projects develop here. We're hiring a text transcription developer specifically for these projects to help develop them here. So Zooniverse, there's a lot of investment on their end, and they're working with Google, they're working with NYPL Labs, they're working with a bunch of people to help develop these new tools. So, down the road, there are more platforms for you to be able to do this with your own projects. Scripto comes out of the Center for History and New Media. Again, everything that's green in here are links, so those will go to the website for this particular platform. Again, this is volunteer-based, free and open source. You can install this if you have a Omeka, Drupal, or WordPress instance. A lot of people use it. It's not as user-friendly as I'd like it to be. So it can be a little hard to get going. And it's hard to it's kind of like the Minneapolis newspaper index where you have, here's the thing here, and then you have a box and you transcribe it here. It's not like you're clicking on the image and transcribing there. So there will be maybe some learning curve, or it won't be, if you are, say, here's an example of of a crowdsourcing project, you're sending them to Zooniverse, and you're sending them to what's on the menu, and then you say, here's ours, and it's not as easy. People might not have as good of a time, or you might not get as the results that you want. So that's been my experience with Scripto. I'm not sure if they have other plans to develop it further, but George Mason and the Center for History and New Media has lots of projects. They're the folks who brought you Omeka. They're the folks who brought you Zotero. They do lots of really cool stuff. And then there's a link for the projects that are using Scripto there. And this is targeted specifically at libraries and GLAMs, galleries, libraries, galleries, libraries, and museums, GLAMs, specifically for their collections. So whether they're image tagging or transcription or things like that. Crowdcrafting is a new one. I'm really interested in this. I was just tweeting with Maya yesterday. Like, have you done anything with this? It's a site that has a bunch of templates that you can go into. This is a little hard to read, but there's a sound pattern recognition template, image pattern recognition template using SoundCloud and Flickr, and video pattern recognition with Vimeo. EpiCollect is an open source collection project. Urban Park task template. So they're connecting to lots of other things and open standards, which is really interesting. You can also download all the data right there in the project. And so, I know with some Zooniverse projects, there's a time where the data won't be publicly available. Eventually, it will have to be publicly available. But there's some time that the researchers can work with it just on their own. But it's out there immediately for people to use. It's foundation funded, data available online in CSV and JSON format, so you can do other things with it. Again, that question of just searching around this stuff, something that you may not be able to do, or you may not have thought of it to do it in this way. So this is one that I just started exploring, and I talked to Maya yesterday. She's like, we're kind of road testing this, and we're going to do more next week. So I'm going to stay in touch with her and see what she thinks of that. And then the last one is the Mechanical Turk, which is Amazon's paid service, where paid micro labor service. And this, the Turkers are the people who are doing these kind of not menial tasks, but these, again, these kind of tasks that we've been talking about. We're going to, transcribe this thing, or you're going to, tag this photo, or things like that. Built on micropayments. This is very controversial, as I think is all crowdsourcing. And this is a question that needs to be thought of whenever you're designing a project: is what are the ethical limitations? How much can you ask of people to do? What makes Mechanical Turk controversial is that there is not a reporting mechanism within Turk to report people who are not paying folks or are abusing workers or things like that. There are people at the computer science department who are working on this, developing sites where you can report employers who are doing this. So you can sign up, you can work on them, and you can do a project yourself. So these last two are easier to get started. There's not a lot of back-end work, or it's not a lot of, oh, we don't have any developers at Zooniverse who can work in your project. So, these are ways to get started. This is the flashpoint for a lot of the controversy around crowdsourcing, but it's not the only point. And so thinking, and Lucy and I have talked, Lucy Fortson and I have talked about this, and where is that line ethically for how much you want to ask someone to do? You are participating in a real research project. These things will be public. No one is profiting from these, et cetera, et cetera. I think that gives a lot in Zooniverse's favor for this kind of work. Other things that might not be so cut and dry. So those are 4 platforms just to get, if you want to explore them, just get started. There's tons of projects on crowdcrafting as well I'm going to explore in the coming weeks. Any questions, thoughts from there? Anything online? There's a good body of literature happening or developing around the questions of digital labor, both from the algorithmic perspective and trying to build sites that are addressing some of these things, or how do we develop a fairer micropayment kind of platform, as well as critiques of this from a labor study standpoint, from a critical digital study standpoint as well. If you want more of that, I can share that with you. So finally, design your own. So you should have a handout with you. If not, they're on the table back there. So you're gonna get in a couple small groups maybe. So we probably have 3 groups. Liz, why don't you join Alicia and Alice? They're like the social science people and your data creation people and their name both have the same like root name for it. So one group there, one group here. Monica, if you want to join them, or if you want to take part. Robbie, feel free to jump in too. Big thanks to Robbie for running all the tech this week. And so, look at this handout and start working through it. So thinking of just your basic ideas of what you would have something you want to work with. A collection you might know about, or a collection you might have, or just a collection you can imagine. Actually, let me grab one of those myself. Make sure I know what you're doing.
What our group is, if we're with them, or I'm not sure.
So this is two.
I wasn't clear how you were dividing it.
Oh,
She
just left. Okay, so just jump over with them. So the first part, just thinking of the jobs you need help with. What do people like doing with their content, and how can you bring them together? So kind of the brainstorm around this. We'll do this for about 10 minutes, and then you'll go on to the second phase where actually start really thinking about structuring this and scaffolding.
I need to do it for more of a personal interest. That's great.
Could yeah, because there's one on here already, but it's sheet-based, the ensemble, so there's some theater. Which is great for the users. Check the metadata on this data. But
Although I'm not nervous because I have 8, 9 nieces and nephews, and
they're actually having
they all have like iPads and whatever those little things are called. They're all like amazing.
I have a question too. So that, and then I hope that we want some contacts. Anyway, I don't know what our performing arts are. I know that they have whether they also have general collection of historic theater programs. That I mean, there's those communities in Illinois, and that people would be encouraged to add to the transcription, like
On the wall, and he goes up to it and like grabs it and starts trying to swipe it, see more pictures. And he's like, "What's going on?"
considering the whole rights.
But we were just talking about
My project is the other Cecily responsibility. That's the John Berryman project.
Oh, okay.
I love John Berryman as an orator, not necessarily as a literary, because he's an incredibly charismatic speaker. He's a powerful performer, and people don't know that about him. And so I would love some sort of project. Also a lot of copyright implications, but where I keep tracking down these little like bootleg tapes and things from different places of him speaking.
Or
I know we have
somebody's
stuff
like
in our.
talking to somebody at a bar.
He's drunk,
He's
well, yeah,
drunk.
with Barry Alvarez, and but he's a human being when you see him speak, and he rips into people in Rockport. He's like, "That's the stupidest question you've ever asked me." And I love this man. And so that's what would be my project. Well, identifying the content, surfacing the bootlegs, trying to somehow touch base with Cecily's. I went to Donahue, his widow. She's like, "Hey, go look in it," but trying to see what we have in terms of audio visual variants and somehow coming up with a collective this material, then having it, yes, transcribed, being able to really develop the text with the media multimodal approach that bridges the
Yeah, I mean, it's like, that might be something.
his oratory with his literary in a way that
Right, and then like you, I mean, recently, some other places.
Sorry.
3D.
That's why I wanted to hear this. So
Yeah.
maybe it will come at some point because there's
Connecting a lot of dots.
such an
Models that are
amazing person.
Terrain and stuff.
It's like, maybe that's like something that will spark interest for like people. I mean, it's like
She is
going through different ones. I mean,
this project.
for me, I think it'd be fun to do the zoo stuff, but
And
I have no
essentially
interest in animals. But maybe doing that would
There's
spark
people.
interest. Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then on a basis of set of guidelines, and how can we
Maybe
connect
that's
that with
to
some
go
of this?
actually like.
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen with that, you get text-based projects is they always want to like somebody transcribes and then have.
Right.
check
Yeah, oh,
it.
yeah, absolutely.
They always do.
Absolutely.
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 That kind of-
Absolutely.
But I only see.
Absolutely, but the biggest barrier is merging those primary sources. You know, the South Guthrie collection, for example, and the copyright. Because a lot of these things, like somebody stuck a camera in there, something. I don't even know how they got it, you know, but it got out there. But it needs to be out there. Sorry, I hope that's not recorded, sorry. But no, I mean, this is orphan work. Sorry.
Mine sort of example of all the OCR. I have four drawers stacked of licenses, and the OCR is massive. And I want to be able to compare old licenses to new licenses easily. And I mean, I don't know if scanning them would actually fix a lot of the problems because they're from like faxes. They were scanned, which are horrible. And we have all of the files.
Digitized manuscripts for copyright. Materials are old enough, we're just not, other materials are new enough.
No, I mean, you can look at it, I mean, when I look at the scanned copy, I can read it back.
They're old enough, they're probably.
The OCR, when I tried to just take the PDF and
Okay, so
it's just like, the whole thing is different.
Are you using a B? Are you just using the native PDF OCR? Oh, that's your problem. No problem. There, you want to use that ABBYY or something that's more dynamic. I can look into it. Yeah, Acrobat Pro is not going to be the best OCR. YY. Although I don't know if they're now owned by somebody else or what. This is back in the day when I used to do some OCR. There's dedicated OCR software that's better than what's built into it.
And they were
So
scanned,
you want to talk to Jason
a while
about
ago,
that.
and I'm sure that the scanning.
The technology's gotten a lot better.
Yeah, so.
Just
Who should I talk to?
Jason Roy.
Oh,
Yeah, this is his bread and butter.
problem solved. Good.
Well, I don't know if it's solved, but it should be better. Yeah. Come up with a strap line for your project.
Yeah, but you shouldn't have just.
Like the plot line in IMDb, like the plot line, where you have like one sentence, like that explains the whole movie.
Bringing very.
A strap line, that's just a strap line.
Yeah,
Doesn't
no,
have to be what it
yeah,
means,
although
right?
he would appreciate it, but not many other people would.
I got a project.
Okay.
We've got those transcriptions from Minnesota dailies.
They're like,
We also have done a lot of sizing up the yearbooks. So you can correlate dates, yearbook dates, and
Not digitizing anything, it's already digital, so you're just adding extra data to the pictures, so.
we started with
Right.
But that's what I was thinking, is that we would do
John
it.
Smith. Is this John Smith?
Right.
They say, you know, we're doing
Whether
this.
they're local
And then
authority.
Time, whether they're just registered to do it at that time. At that point, newspaper checks.
I mean, so I'm not.
I looked up at John Nelson or somebody the other day. There were 500 John Nelsons right now at the University of Minnesota.
That is actually a problem.
If you do not have their email address.
So you have a floor plan, you pick all for that, then you have to like get the data points where everything intersects.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah,
article was
yeah.
a lot of those.
This guy, not this biologist.
Well, you could do it from a historical context, too,
Right.
like through, like, we have, there's a really cool project in Massachusetts.
Fantastic. What do with your input content? Well, they weren't really
What
doing
jobs
my
do you help
input.
us with?
So so if you're just keeping on time, moving on, I think I hear over here, going on to the second part already. A strap line is like, in the film where we cut a log line, elevator pitch. What is that thing that summarizes it really quickly for someone else?
Hot tagline, right?
Yep.
Maybe.
Yep.
And actually, there is a list of open works that is sent. So whenever something comes up, like there is a place where I can go that I know there's only one or two films where I know there's only
Right
one
now,
or two
there's a
copies
huge
existing in the world. And people keep, they estimate between 18 seconds, whatever, 1888 and 1980% of all film produced was lost.
And if you go into Google Maps, they have
Of that computer,
aerial views.
that is crowdsourced, and you're always,
Like,
every
you hear
once in a
about
while,
the big one, they
people,
mentioned
it
the
is an
Sherlock Holmes
open,
one that they found.
and I'm registered with them to be able to add
But I think like
another
really cool,
film.
you see, like,
This was, yeah, just.
Oh, Sherlock, they found another Sherlock Holmes one?
Yeah, from,
Exactly.
in an archive in France.
people that will never be able
And
to.
Yes.
it's like, that his only appearance on film. but
So,
as Sherlock
so this would be the kind of case where
Silent film.
you would wanna know if, most of the archivists are already involved in this project. So this would be a case where I'm registered and I would go in now and add, hopefully whoever found it knows enough to add it to this database. To me, I consider that a crowdsourcing project.
Everything at the United States.
That's-
I
that's
highly doubt that I'll ever get a chance to go to the place in Dubai with that. It'd be cool to see if.
Right.
And, okay, so.
Well, yeah, rather than having one person.
Well,
They used to publish this in a book, like Bach or somebody used to
Yeah.
publish a book on it, but it's much more, these things happen every week.
Yeah.
Or every, well, or a couple, every month at least, although it slows down, but yeah, but having it on a website's a lot better.
Yep.
Absolutely.
What do people have a desire to see?
Right, and then, I mean, you can easily,
Right.
like what you were saying earlier, with the landscape ones, you can kind of see like what you personally have contributed to.
Don't put 60 days to good
So,
one.
and then right off.
Oh, you want it faster.
I need an updated list for every time I get a request. I need a go-to place rather than having to try to track down something on.
Yeah, you.
And if they're releasing.
We're talking about humanities here. If you want science, you can go over there.
So that would be approval right off the bat that we have to overcome, and then again.
Strapline, what's the strapline for
We
your?
would be building something of value by.
Who is John Nelson?
Yeah.
Which John?
Using photos for free when they.
Everyone's fairly
About to.
Yeah, but people
Mapping.
submitting for.
Well, mapping, building. Yeah.
I actually found it's funny that you should mention
Especially
that. I
with, like,
found my
camera
uncle, who was a PhD and made an undergrad here in math.
Well, and
He
if,
was in the 1950s.
From,
Quiz
if
Bowl, and I
we were,
found the article on the Quiz Bowl in the Daily that was scanned. And it was funny because I never thought I would be repping a science quiz bowl. Sure enough, there I was, and I was able to make a connection
but still, like you said.
to my uncle, 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like
That there are no photos. that-
Ancestry.com.
Yeah.
And even the fundraiser, like spaces.
Believe me, I'm the last person I would have thought would have ended up in a science. I don't know if it's being recorded or not, but it works.
Sort of flavor terminology,
Yeah.
like, bringing to light or opening the curtains to, yes, cause
Something like that,
you must be supportive.
Can you make
And that'd be the harder part, I think. You get a large enough database, it'd be hard to search through them all. I know Google was just using that for Google Maps for a while.
I just got my cards from
And,
so,
Crowdsourcing
yeah,
Maps
just
program right now is actually, so they say, more accurate than Google.
Past.
It's more up to date.
I mean, it's like coming up with a snazzy presentation
Anyways,
title, or,
email,
you know,
which are asking about your ask.
I don't think there's anything snazzy you can do like.
Yeah, so that was what we were where's the motivation from?
Right, exactly. It would be a totally.
driving along.
Yeah, right.
It's-
Right.
But all of these are,
So it would.
oh, for your case, yeah.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
But it could be.
Oh,
better
okay.
negotiation through, you know.
Well, supposedly the past.
Yeah. So, but in our case,
And then you get like some alert about
Right.
it from your
I
phone.
don't know about the Minnesota Daily, the newspaper might be interested.
The alumni.
The Alumni
Alumni
Association would be
Association.
interested.
And they really
I
do
mean,
get,
Google's
I
pretty good about
the
updating
archives
crashes and
all the
stuff,
time,
but I
yeah,
mean,
people wanting
I still-
information about their.
Although you know my quote about how great the 99-cent burger from 1997 at McDonald's was or something, it's not necessarily the like lasting contribution I want.
But his family is
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no, I just gave you an example of where that really came into play. And I was like, hey, and next time I saw him, I was like, I didn't know you were on the 57. He was on the national team, you know, he was on the traveling team.
Yeah, they got digitization.
So I guess, one of the
They
tasks
did.
is uploading photos and then going to like say Google Map and checking out the building
Right.
that
The small
came
stuff
from
that
and which floor and everything.
they should
Right.
cross-reference your work on each of those sources, and then start building a corrected system. Detail.
Do you want other links? Here, upload some photos. Or do you want?
And then you have to somehow bring it up to date in order to email them, I don't know. I'm just trying to
Stop
figure
the
out the
project
authority
point where
record.
the top part's not gonna let you. But you understand.
So the reason you'd want to associate this is because Google already knows who we are, so when you do a self-search, it would come up.
No, I want to associate it so that if somebody looks at your book entries, they can easily find it. They get tool. Did you look for the people in
Okay,
this?
so reference, so it's referral.
Your grandfather. And it enriches each of the entry points for
I
for
think,
data with the other.
I
which
think, yeah,
otherwise-
but thinking about this from a semantic perspective,
And I think
since Google,
for a
if you're
task,
signed in, knows who you are and tailors that information to you, then those connections can also surface some of these things.
The wall, here's the, where you have to take a left turn, there's a hallway
Once we put it back,
type thing, so that way you get a very
we're
good.
talking.
I think that's how I found it though.
No, it's.
Minnesota Daily Spicer.
But, yeah, it would really depend on.
Or, no, I just looked him up, actually, I just looked at it, and I actually just searched it, and I came up with that article. I didn't think I
Swap with
did.
his yearbook.
But anyway, but.
What? No,
The architecture,
Why not?
I'm
If they
like,
were all connected.
I never
Down
would
to
have thought
one,
I didn't
find
even.
the
a
other.
couple years ago, but they have a thing in Rapson Hall where you can
It
put
would
on
be easier
a,
for someone to start with the yearbook and then.
Right, I just didn't know.
I know
free
that people go
space
through.
that you created.
Oh,
But I'm not trying to
So
say,
like you
they have to
design
follow
this
this
huge
path.
project, and at the end of this
They
semester,
should
you
have
put on
these
this headset and walk through it.
And that will make.
How would they get to the first point?
So it's like virtual reality.
And it's like, you know that courtyard, have you ever been in Rapson? It's like that white courtyard in the middle of it.
That gets into the semantics. I mean,
Probably like 50 feet by 50 feet.
that's what's interesting with the Humanities project. Is you begin. You don't just want to know if there's a cheetah here. We want to know which.
And the new Oculus Rift, I mean, come on.
We want to say, this is a
I feel like
different.
coming out with a new virtual reality.
This is
That's
the
what happens
mother
with
of this.
people. Right, and that's what happens with people. That's why.
so you're kind of doing analysis.
I'm probably not gonna.
You're
get
sort of
too hyped
doing
up about it
analysis.
until, like, it's a
I mean, the
bunch
more
of
granular you get, the more the analysis.
Yeah, and the thing is, the scientific projects tend to have really good granularity. You want to tell, how many of these.
I thought.
Well, the analysis will be done externally, right, once you have your data set, right.
I mean, it's different projects, it's different research.
Right.
I got it.
That's not.
Headset.
You know, like a fairly even number of lines.
No.
But like with some
If it like has some kind
things,
of
like.
thing where you turn your head, like it
Others
moves
just
your gun down one track and you have to shoot somebody, and you move your head back the other way to shoot like the guys that are coming at you if you don't
Right,
shoot
not
them all
shooting.
fast enough. Yeah,
Cause like obviously.
that was like virtual
They do
reality.
GPS tracking and things of that nature. Unfortunately, it's horrible for your unfortunately.
Okay, let's come back and share with the rest of the group what you've been talking about for the last 20 minutes. What brilliant projects have you devised that will
Humans very good.
set the crowdsourcing world on fire, Scott?
What's that?
So I just want to have both share their projects with each other and what they've come up with. So who wants to start? What have you guys been talking about? Looking at you, Scott. Oh, okay, Maureen.
All right, we can, otherwise I was gonna say we can start back here in the corner. We conceived of kind of a concept of maybe trying to do a design or architecture project. And
I'm going to give you this microphone.
Okay, where we would seek out volunteer photo submissions to create 3D interior and exterior renderings of buildings. And you could do that, you could do it from a historical perspective, have how the interiors and exteriors changed over time. You could have sort of just the architecture, like capturing all those details, and also then building like an accurate 3D rendering model. And that we would start by having, showing people some models and some renderings, and then encouraging them to submit photos if they had them, marking points of interest that they would like to see modeled. We definitely had we thought there was potential for a lot of ethical and legal questions involved, of course, and a lot of technical issues we'd have to overcome. But and then from the perspective of doing a task, we were thinking that we could have people like adding lines to designate walls and floors, and helping sort of improve the scale and the spatial of some of the photos, being able to see if the perspective had gotten off, kind of having them designate that or mark it. So that was kind of where we were going with it. Not fully or a fleshed out idea, but yeah.
So something kind of like, oh, this doesn't do it.
Like something that already exists. Yeah.
Photosynth, maybe. Oh, yeah.
So this is one of my favorites. Where you have photographs taken from the same spot.
Right. We have the video, London, New London.
Yeah.
Wonderful London.
So be able to compare it historically.
Yeah, and the historic perspective like that, and then like we were thinking of actual 3D modeling of buildings, like,
Right.
and then mapping photos onto that model.
Yeah.
Photosynth.
Cool. What's the appeal of that? How would you motivate people to participate?
Yeah, like I said, we were thinking of that the starting point would be, by making something like this available and sort of saying, oh, look, you can come and look at these models, you can look at photos, having people kind of browsing, and then having the submission or the contribute data piece of it kind of attached to the gallery.
Thoughts on that? Are there projects?
So a project I wanted to do, although it's maybe not necessarily the same kind of crowdsourcing, some of the ones here is a kind of a John Berryman multimedia project where folks would at least help curate sort of there's a lot of bootleg and other kinds of media. I know maybe I shouldn't say this, but there's a lot of different kinds of he's a great orator as well as a poet, and there are a lot of great videos and tapes and things that I come across. And so having a community come together and identify where that media is, again, you'd have intellectual property barriers, but then maybe some kind of platform that could merge his visual with his audio, with his oratory, as well as his text, to really bring the full sort of scale of his sort of being to life. I think would be something really interesting to people who follow this individual.
A couple people have brought up IP, and one thing I was talking with Nancy Sims, our copyright librarian. I'm not saying you should go do this. You should go talk to Nancy. But we're talking about crowdsourcing something with a collection of liner notes from CDs and records, and those are all copywritten. We could, however, make a fair use argument that we are not exposing the entirety of it. We are only exposing a few lines of it. And again, so you're not presenting someone with, here's the whole PDF of liner notes to transcribe. Here are 3 lines. And that might also, fall under fair use. So you're not exposing the entire thing. So when you're thinking about some of this stuff, there's also an avenue with that as well. You guys, anything else you guys want to add? Sure. Okay, Steve.
My project idea is that project idea. We have digitizations of the Minnesota Daily and the Minnesota yearbooks and the indexes, and it would be index cards from earlier. And it would be interesting to tie those together so that when you have an identity, maybe a student associated with a department with hobbies and whatnot that gets recorded in a yearbook, you can tie that to the appearance of that name in a Minnesota Daily article from the 1920s, so that somebody who comes in to the Daily through a Google search can find the yearbook entry in the photograph, and somebody who comes in through the yearbook entry can find their way to the Daily article, and so that these things get connected. The tricky part with this project would be that you get into the semantics of what these things are, not just the transcription of simple words. So it would involve more complexity than some of the humanities projects have. But I think who's in Minnesota Daily, who's in the news would be my tagline. And you'd appeal to alumni and Minnesotans who are interested in the historical period that's available under copyright. Yeah, those two.
And lots of genealogists. You guys?
So we had 2 ideas over here. One was to crowdsource transcription and translation for either pieces of oral history or digital stories that are in languages other than English. That's something I encounter a lot in my job. So to have a way of a central site, but then you could search by language and ask people to do really small chunks, like 2 or 3 lines, have them transcribe and translate, and then having a mechanism for people to check. And so tapping into genealogical networks, heritage speakers, and cultural organizations to get their participation, which is something we found people are really interested when you're saying, hey, you're actively part of preserving your own history.
So another fantasy crowdsourcing project would be somehow having crowdsourcing of curating data. So for example, how do we extract metadata from a lot of interviews or a lot of data sets that may or may not be complete, by having an individual look at different kinds of variables across different kinds of studies. It's not very sexy compared to other kinds of projects, but could be a good tool in the classroom. For example, library science is teaching people about data curation, getting experience and exposure to a lot of different kinds of data, even associating it with a MOOC or something similar. But privacy issues and keeping people interested in it, I think, would be a challenge of that.
With that one, it's kind of replicating on a bigger scale what you think already would happen with that data. People are going to test it. People are going to verify that you can reach the same conclusions again with it. But building that instead of after the fact, building that in as part of the process, which is interesting. One thing that I forgot to bring up earlier was that projects like Zooniverse a number of other both citizen science and cultural heritage projects, they're not just doing this to, for people to participate. They're, humans are better at some tasks than computers are. Image recognition is one of them, things like that. They're better at manuscript transcription than printed text. But Zooniverse is then taking all of the data and then folding that back into their various algorithms for machine reading. And so eventually there will be a point where like, okay, they can do that. Now we need humans to do this. We'll fold into that way. So it's this iterative process on that end too for what you're contributing to. We are at 11 o'clock. I hope you have found this worthwhile. Keep an eye out for the Humanities RFP. If there's something that strikes your fancy, let's talk. I can help you with the application and things like that. That won't give you an inside track, but I can help you perhaps decipher what that means. Any other questions, please feel free to contact me, both people here and people online, if you're still there. And next week is in this room again, and it'll be Universal Design and Multimodal Scholarship. So we're going to have Phil Cragness from the Disability Resource Center come and talk about universal design, and that thinking about accessibility should not be just after the fact, that I need to make this accessible because this law says so, but that you are thinking of this from the beginning, and that it makes you think about sound components, makes you think of different visual components, things like that. And that leads very nicely into multimodal scholarship, the use of audio, video, photos as a way of thinking just beyond a printed text. So we're going to talk about concepts as well as look at 3 tools, Omeka, Scalar, and Google Sites. So be here, it'll be online and recorded as well.